One of the foremost institutes of animal behavior lies in the heart of Bavaria, in thickly wooded country. National Educational Television asked the British Broadcasting Corporation to send a reporter to the scene to bring back this report for Spectrum. The Max Planck Institute for the Physiology of Behavior is known throughout the world. This is largely due to one man whose work and discoveries have had a profound influence on many of the established views held on instinctive behavior. He is Professor Konrad Lorenz, widely known to a lay public for his popular books on animal behavior. As a scientist, he's the founding father of this new branch of animal study. Now 63, he's worked with animals all his life and likes to refer to himself as a peasant scientist. He still surrounds himself with fish and pets. As a boy, he was fascinated by the whole concept of animal behavior and by Darwin's writings on evolution.
I remember a walk with my father when I had just discovered a popular reproduction of Darwin's work. And I explained all this to my father. And he listened, and he listened very attentively. And I was a great prattler as a child. And he didn't silence me. And this was slightly disquieting. And then I realized that he had known that all along. And I remember distinctly a deep resentment at my father's not telling me something as important as this.
Working as a naturalist, one of his first discoveries was a biological phenomenon which he called imprinting. He found that birds reared apart from their own kind do not know what species belong to. This affects their whole future development, including their selection of a mate. If a duck is reared in the exclusive company of a goose, on reaching maturity, it will only want to mate with geese. Perhaps the most remarkable of all, if two male ducks are brought up together, they will later form a permanent homosexual attachment. This process of imprinting proved to be the key that unlocked the door on a whole area of animal behavior that had never previously been understood.
I encountered the phenomenon very early in life when I was about 6, and my wife and I, who were more or less foster siblings, discovered that ducklings would follow human beings when they were the first live creatures they encountered after hatching. Later on, I found out the hard way that birds which you hand rear cannot be bred because they don't take to fellow members of their own species, but direct all their sexual activities, their courtship behavior, at human beings. And I remember innumerable hand-reared birds, which quite naively I hoped would breed if I put them into an aviary together. And they just didn't, but started to court me. And so when I wrote about imprinting, I first described this process of a more or less irreversible fixation of a drive on its object. One doesn't speak of a conditioned animal, but of a conditioned response, and it's always one particular behavior pattern which gets fixated on an object. Normally the fellow member of the species, abnormally, pathologically, some substitute object. It's simply a case of giving the developing animal misinformation about something. Well, there are some new things to show.
How many birds do you have on the lake here?
Well, about 100 greylegs, and of the other goose species, perhaps 50. Mm-hmm. And then there are 600 or 700 ducks. Mm-hmm. At present, the duck population has tremendously increased since we've been here, because of the imprinting work by Schutz. He needs very large numbers of ducks of different species, particularly of mallards. And you see the result of imprinting experiments everywhere.
Very beautiful colors.
Mallard who thinks he's a... This is the one who walks about with Canada geese. And the one over there is convinced that he's a bar-headed goose. You can see the weirdest couples everywhere. It's quite rare to see a couple of birds which are of the same species and different sex. The boxes on the lake are nesting boxes. You see over there one occupied by a Canadian. And over there is the same thing with the snow goose.
Oh,
The snow gander stands watch. Look at the white fawns flying over.
It seems strange to see a cock there among all the ducks.
Well, this cock thinks he's a duck. Dr. Schutz made a number of experiments trying to imprint sexual responses on chickens. The ducks of an experiment did not become fixated on chickens, not very permanently, at least. And the cock, on the other hand, became firmly fixated on ducks. So will see this cock?
Yes.
Cock always in company, always trying to force his company on ducks and even courting ducks and not finding any response.
And there appear to be two shelldrakes in a pair.
There are two perverted males, and you can see them performing their courtship ceremony all the time together. These two were reared in exclusive company of males, and all these birds formed couples with males. We do not know yet how long, how permanent this is. The question of the reversibility of imprinting is exactly what interests us. Look, there was a mallard now pursuing a greylag. And of course, he never reaches his goal. He runs after the poor greylag. The greylag is frightened, runs away. The goose-imprinted mallards very often attach themselves to families very regularly. And it's very funny if you see a family walking around and one imprinted mallard following them.
One of the more unusual birds on the Institute is a large Muscovy duck, which was reared in human company. Now it totally disregards its own species and directs all its interest at Konrad Lorenz himself. Each time Lorenz appears, the bird goes through a furious courtship procedure to win his attention. Lorenz's whole new approach to the study of animals in their natural surroundings became known as ethology. Although it is now a recognized and accepted science, it met much opposition. He feels this was due to the philosophical attitudes of the time.
I am rather bitter about philosophy, because philosophy has done such a lot of damage to the progress of science by just biasing people, making them quarrel about questions that cannot be settled, and erecting a barrier in the minds of both in regard to certain very obvious questions. And after all, it is a very funny thing that it needed plain zoologists like Charles Otis Whitman and Oscar Heinroth to show the way how to approach in a sensible, biological manner the question of animal behavior.
Is the evil influence of philosophy still as strong today?
Well, look, I think it is stronger in Germany, we are still overshadowed by German idealism, and the English-speaking nations are not. So the obstacle by pure idealism in the philosophical sense, which is still a great obstacle in our trying to make historians and philosophical anthropologists realize that man has a history before he started to write history, which is to me always one of the most amazing things, that historians who ought to be conversant with a historical approach not only deny but resent the fact that man has had a history many thousand times longer before he started to write history than he had after he started to write history.
One aspect of animal behavior that now concerns Lorenz is the aggressive instinct, for he believes that it's essential to the survival of the species. A bird on its nest must have the necessary aggression to defend its young if they're to survive. Around the lake, he's observed how this manifests itself in different species.
Haut vielleicht zu.
That's the father who is defending her. Stay in the boat. The gander is not very courageous because he's a hybrid. He's a snow goose, greater snow greylag hybrid. The mother is pure greater snow.
The mother is wonderful.
And greylags don't defend their nests. Greylag gander. Grab his neck with one hand and tie the finger with the other. What you saw now was the nest defense by a greater snow gander. You'll have noticed the extreme courage this bird develops against a comparatively very big enemy. The species can afford to have this response because in the regions where greater snow geese breed, there are no land predators except the small Arctic fox, which a courageous snow gander can hope to vanquish.
His work showed him that the aggressive instinct was closely linked to the bond of friendship that many animals formed, and that each was indispensable to the correct functioning of the other. These bonds of loyalty, friendship, and even something akin to human love exist only in the highly aggressive social animals. The personal bond and the aggressive drive, he believes, are undeniably linked together. Animals lacking aggression live in large anonymous herds and don't know each other as individuals.
We do not know one non-aggressive animal which does form anything comparable to the bond of friendship between two human individuals. And from the point of view of evolution, this is quite easy to understand because a personal relationship evolved in the animal kingdom wherever it became necessary for two individuals, two or more individuals, not to fight each other, but to cooperate against other fellow members of the species. That's the primary function of the personal bond. We do not know of a single animal devoid of aggression which forms personal bond.
Recently, his attention and interest have centered on fish, and 2 floors of his house are filled with large aquaria. In studying coral fish, he found that these creatures form personal relationships and were also very aggressive. However, he observed that they only directed their aggression at fellow members of their own species and were totally unconcerned about other fish. This behavior he termed intraspecific aggression, and he believes it to be the most dangerous of all because it evokes all the deep feelings of hate and anger. Intraspecific aggression is part of all animals who form personal bonds, including humans. As an example, a shopkeeper in a village, he says, doesn't threaten the lives of a doctor, but another doctor might. Although many animals and fish hunt for prey, Lorenz maintains that this is not aggression in the true sense, as a hunter feels no anger or hate for its victim. One of the more remarkable of these hunting fish is the Caribbean angler. This strange creature sits at the bottom of the tank, looking rather like a large plant. However, it has an unusual method of catching its prey. From its head emerges what seems to be a rod with a worm on the end of it. This is all part of the fish's body, and it's nature's incredible way of supplying it with the equipment to catch other fish. When a victim is incautious enough to approach too near, its end is swift. Occasionally, an overcautious fish approaches even when the rod and line is not out, and its fate is equally certain. Although intraspecific aggression is only directed at fellow members of the species, Lorenz found that most fish rarely harm each other when they fight. However furious the combat, there seems to be a deep inhibiting mechanism which prevents killing. The fight itself becomes a ritual combat rather than a mortal struggle.
The two males, which you see here, show a very queer quivering movement with the tail, which is used as a threat, and now they butt each other without actually biting, and finally seize each other's lips and pull to and fro. The contest is purely one of strength and endurance. The mouth pulling in some species can last for hours and hours. The fish do not actually hurt each other. If one fish presents its flank to the other, it's never really bitten. But the question, who's the better man, is settled exclusively by the endurance of each of the two rivals. These fish fight for territory. Now you see beautifully how the one fish presents his flank in lateral display and how the other is inhibited from biting into the unprotected flank. And now one fish gives up. The one that throws in the sponge always flees upwards, because the territories are on the bottom. So fleeing upward, the vanquished fish has the shortest way to get out of the victor's territory.
Konrad Lorenz feels very strongly that his work on animals has a relevance to man himself and to the understanding of man's instincts. Human behavior, far from being determined by reason and cultural tradition only, is still subject to all the laws of instinctive behavior. We are just a rung on the ladder of evolution, he says, just as the dinosaur was. And it's quite likely that an even higher species will eventually evolve. However, if man is to have a chance of evolving at all, his first need is to understand the aggressive aspect of his personality. Aggression can get out of hand in man as well as in animals, and Konrad Lorenz, by studying what man has in common with animals, is increasing our understanding of it.
Man certainly is an animal, but a very peculiar one. It would be very misleading to say that man is essentially an animal, because just in regard to the properties and faculties which are essentially human, man is something very, very different indeed from any animal.
Man seems to be more aggressive to his own species than other animals are. Why is this?
I think that Erik Erikson has given a very intelligent answer to this question. Any cultural group regards itself as slightly superior to the neighboring comparable cultural group. And Erikson has called that this cultural process of culture group diverging, evolving in different directions and regarding each other as inferior, as pseudo-speciation. And that's a very good word. Pseudo-speciation. This is borne out by the fact that in very many primitive languages, the name for their own tribe is synonymous with man. So when in a battle these people slaughter each other, they may eat the fallen warriors of the other tribe without, strictly speaking, being guilty of cannibalism, because it's only we that are men and they are animals. Now the insidious thing about this sort of group formation and pseudo-speciation is that the enemy tribe is regarded as non-human, yet the aggression they evoke is truly intraspecific aggression with all the fury which man or any other animal can only develop in fighting a conspecific. So you have, so to say, a shooting license by pseudo-speciation, and the hunting of the other animal is not motivated by just hunger or some rather innocuous hunting drive, but by the full intensity and fury of intraspecific aggression.
Well, if man has all this aggression and isn't holding it in check, now he has so much power, isn't there a danger that he may destroy himself?
Well, of course, yes. Well, that's just the thing. And particularly the far-reaching weapons which are able to destroy without bringing home to the emotional personality of the man who uses them what he did. Nobody would even go rabbit hunting if he had to kill the rabbit with his teeth and claws. It's just that we don't realize that this just crooking the finger tears the entrails of a very nice, sweet animal that we can't hunt at all.
But you're an optimist, surely. You don't believe that man will destroy himself?
Well, in preaching a sermon, you may have to pretend an optimism which you do not fully feel. I am optimistic because I wouldn't have the impulse to preach sermons about the dangers of humanity if I were not fundamentally an optimist. But the danger is very great. I mean, if anybody tells me that he does not believe in the survival of humanity for even the next few hundred years, I have nothing to say against it. I have no arguments. Man may survive, you see. Man may evolve into something higher and better. But there is no law of nature which makes him do so. He has jolly well to see about it himself.
Dr. Konrad Lorenz, scientist, philosopher. His work, the study of man's aggression as a key to his early survival on Earth. And now, a possible cause of man's own destruction unless it is understood and brought under control.